So we get set up again, guys. Just need to, let's see. I really need to be better about my timing, but oh well. Let me just, find the, if I can find it. There it is. Alright. Perfect. Alright. Here we go. Good evening, everybody. Converse Games here, and welcome to Stories with Con, Episode 3. Now, you all know what time it is, huh? Today, we are tackling Chapter 3 of The Silver Eyes. Now, you're probably wondering, Con, didn't you say that you'd only be doing this on Saturday nights? Well, yes, I did during the first stream, but I actually thought of it more, and I decided that instead, I would be doing it every night before I go to sleep, just to give you guys a little more, excitement every now and again. So, without further ado, let's get started in Chapter 3. And no, there's nothing behind me, there's nothing on the desk, there's nothing. So, with that being said, let's continue. Thud, thud, thud. Charlie started out in a... Wow, this is a great start. Stuttering Connor. Charlie was startled out of sleep, disoriented. Something was banging on the door, trying to force its way in. Oh, for goodness sake, Jessica said grumpily, and Charlie blinked and sat up. Right. The motel. Hurricane. Someone was knocking on the door. As Jessica went to answer it, Charlie got out of the bed and looked at the clock. It was 10 a.m. She looked out of the window on the bright new day. She had slept worse than usual. Not nightmares, but dark dreams she could not quite remember. Things that stuck with her just beyond the back of her mind. Images she could not catch. "Charlie!" Someone was screeching. Charlie went to the door and found herself immediately enveloped in a hug. Marla's plump arms gripping her like a vise. Charlie hugged her back, tighter than she meant to. When Marla let go, she had stepped back, grinning. Marla's moods had always been so intense, they were contagious, spreading out to whoever was in her path. When she was gloomy, a pall fell over all her friends. The sun had gone behind her cloud. When she was happy, like now, it was impossible to avoid the lift of her joy. She was always breathless, always slightly scattered, always giving the impression that she was running late, though she almost never was. Marla was wearing a loose dark red blouse, and it suited her well, setting off her fair skin and dark brown hair. Charlie had kept in better touch with Marla than the others. Marla was the type who made it easy to stay friends, even at a distance. Even as a little kid, she was always sending letters and postcards, undeterred if Charlie didn't respond to every one. She was resolutely positive, and assumed that everyone liked her unless they made it clear otherwise, using the proper expletives. I guess that's what I say. Oh well. Where was I? Charlie admired it about her. She herself, though not shy, was always calculating. Does that person like me? Are they just being polite? How do people tell the difference? Marla had come to visit her once when they were 12. She had charmed Charlie's aunt and made fast friends with her school friends, while still making it abundantly clear that she was Charlie's friend, and she was only there to see Charlie. Marla's gigantic smile turned serious as she studied Charlie, peering at her as if trying to spot the differences since they last met. "You're as pale as ever." She took Charlie's hand in her own. "And you're all clammy. Don't you ever get warm?" She dropped Charlie's hands and proceeded to study the motel skeptically, as though uncertain exactly what it was. It's a luxury suite. Hello, everybody. It's a luxury suite, Jessica said without expression as she searched for something in her bag. Her hair was sticking up in all directions, and Charlie stifled a smile. It was nice to see something about Jessica in disarray for once. Jessica found her hairbrush and immediately held it triumphantly. Ha! Take that, Morning Frizz! Come on in, Charlie said, realizing she and Marla were still in the doorway, the door wide open. Marla nodded. One sec. Jason! She shouted out the door. No one emerged. Jason! A young boy came trotting up from the road. When he was short and weary, darker skinned than his half-sister. His Batman t-shirt and black shorts were made for someone twice his size. His black hair was cut too close to his head, and his arms and legs were streaked with dirt. Streaked with dirt. What am I saying? Can I please just speak clearly when I'm reading this book? Think about what you say, Con. Bloody. Were you playing in the road? Marla demanded. No, he said. Yes, you were. Don't do that. If you get yourself killed, Mom's gonna blame me. Get inside. Marla shoved her little brother inside and shook her head. How old are you now? Charlie asked. 11, Jason said. He went to the TV and started fiddling with the buttons. Jason, stop it, Marla said. Play with your action figures. I'm not a little kid, he said. Anyway, they're in the car, but he stepped away from the television and went to look out the window. Marla rubbed her eyes. We just got here. We had to leave at 6 this morning, and someone, she pointed, glancing over at her shoulder at Jason, wouldn't stop fiddling with the radio. I am so tired. She didn't seem tired, but then she never did. At their sleepovers as kids, Charlie remembered her bouncing around like a maniac while the rest of them were winding down for the night, then falling asleep abruptly, like a cartoon character who had been hit over the head with a rolling pin. We should get ready, Jessica said. We're supposed to meet the guys at the diner in an hour. Hurry, Marla said. We have to change, too. I didn't want to get all gross while we were driving. And Grace, do you mind? I'm trying to read. This is going to become a thing now. Every time I start this, the cat is going to jump up and interrupt me. Oh well. Right. Jason, you can watch TV, Charlie said, and he looked at her, and he looked at Marla. She nodded, and he grinned and turned it on, starting to flip through channels. Please just pick a channel, Marla said. Charlie headed into the bathroom to get dressed, while Jessica fussed with her hair. A little less than an hour later, they pulled into the diner parking lot. The others were already there, in the same booth they had been in the night before. When they got inside, Marla performed a second round of squeals and hugs, only slightly quieter now that they were in public. Overshadowed by her enthusiasm, Lamar stood and waved at Jessica and Charlie, waiting until Marla sat down. Hi guys, he said at last. He was wearing a dark tie and dark gray suit. He was all tall and thin, black, with his hair shaved close to his head. His features were sharp and attractive, and he looked just a little older than the rest of them. It could have been the suit, but Charlie thought it was something about the way he stood, holding himself like he would be comfortable wherever he was. They all had dressed up a little for the ceremony. Marla had changed at the motel, and she and Jessica were both wearing dresses. Jessica was knee-length and covered in pastel flowers, a light fabric that moved as she walked. Marla's was simple, white with big sunflowers splashed all over it. Charlie Ann thought to bring a dress, and she hoped she didn't look out of place in black pants and a white button-down shirt. Speak clearly, Connor. John was wearing a light purple shirt today, though he added a matching tie in a slightly darker color. and Carlton seemed to be wearing an identical outfit as before. Still all in black, they all sat down. "Well, don't we all look nice?" Marla said happily. "Where's Jason?" Jessica craned her head from side to side. Marla groaned. "I'll be right back." She scooted out of the booth and hurried out the door. "Lamar, what have you been up to?" Charlie asked. Lamar grinned. "He's an Ivy League man," Carlton said, teasing Lamar, looking briefly down at the table. But he was smiling. "Early acceptance was all he said." "Which one?" Jessica said. "Cornell." "Wait, how did you already apply to college?" Charlie said. "That's not till next year. I don't even know where you want to go. Where I want to go. I don't even know where I want to go." "You skipped 6th grade," John said. There was a brief flicker of something across his face, and Charlie knew what it was. John liked being the clever one. The precocious one? I guess that's what I'm saying. I'm sorry if I am butchering some of these words, but it's the best I can do at the moment. Lamar had been kind of a goof-off when they were kids, and now he had leaped ahead. John first forced a grin, and the moment passed. "Congratulations," he said, with no hint that it was not entirely sincere. Marla came bursting in again, this time towing Jason behind her, holding onto his upper arm. At the hotel, she had made him change into a blazer and khakis as well, though he was still wearing his Nikes. "I'm coming, stop it," he whined. "Is that Jason?" Carlton asked. "Yeah," Jason said. "Do you remember me?" Carlton said. "I don't remember any of you," Jason said unapologetically. "Sit there," Marla said, pointing over to the next booth. "Okay," he grumbled. "Marla, he can sit with us," Jessica said. "Jason, come on over." "I want to sit here," he said, and sat down behind them. He pulled a video game out of his pocket and was oblivious to the world. The waitress came over as they ordered. Marla told her to put Jason's breakfast on their check. When their food came, Charlie checked her watch. "We don't have a lot of time," she said. "We'll get there," Carlton said. "It's not far." A small piece of food fell out of his mouth as he gestured down the road. "Have you been back to the school?" Lamar asked, and Carlton shrugged. "I pass it sometimes. I know this is a nostalgia trip for all of you, but I just live here. I don't exactly go around reminiscing about kindergarten all the time." They were all quiet for a second, the beeps and pings of Jason's video game filling the silence. "Hey, did you know Lamar's going to Cornell next year?" Jessica said to Marla. "Really? Well, aren't you ahead of the pack?" she said. Marla looked down at his plate. When he looked up, he was a little flushed. "All part of the 5-year plan," he said. They laughed, and his blush deepened. "It's kind of weird to be back here," he said, hastily changing the subject. "I think it's strange that I'm the only one who lives here," Carlton said. "Nobody ever leaves Hurricane." "Is it strange, though?" Jessica said thoughtfully. "My parents, you remember, my mom's from New York originally. She used to joke about going back. When I go back to New York, but it might have been when I win the lottery. She didn't mean it. And then right after she stopped joking about it. Then 3 months later, we were all on a plane to visit her sisters in Queens. And we never came back. My dad's father died when I was 9. And they came back to Hurricane for the funeral without me. They didn't want me coming back here. And honestly, I didn't want to go. I was kind of anxious the whole time when they were gone. I kept looking out the window, hoping they would come back early. Like something bad was going to happen to them if they stayed." They looked at one another, considering. Charlie knew they had all moved, all but Carlton. But she had never thought about it. People moved all the time. Carlton was right, though. People didn't leave Hurricane. We moved because my dad got a new job the summer after 3rd grade, John said. That's not exactly mysterious, Lamar. You left in the middle of the semester that year. Yeah, he said. But that's because when my parents split, I went with my mom to Indianapolis, he frowned. But my dad moved too. He's in Chicago now. My parents left because of Michael, Marla said. They all turned to her. Afterward, my mom couldn't sleep. She said spirits were stirring in the town, unquiet. My dad told her she was being ridiculous, but we left as fast as we could. Marla looked around at her friends. What? She said defensively. I don't believe in ghosts. I do, Charlie said. She felt like she was talking from a great distance. She was almost surprised they could hear her. I mean, not ghosts, but memories. I think they linger, whether there's someone there or not. The house, her old house, was imbued with memory, with loss, with longing. It hung in the air like humidity. The walls were saturated, like the wood had soaked it in. It had been there before she came, and it was there now. It would be there forever. It had to be. There was too much, too great and too vast a weight for Charlie to have brought it with her. That doesn't make sense, Jessica said. Memory is in our brains, like literally stored in our brains. You can see it on a scan. It can't exist outside of someone's mind. I don't know, John said. Think of all the places that have atmosphere. Old houses, sometimes places where you walk in and you feel sad or nostalgic, even though you've never been there before. That's not other people's memories, though, Lamar said. That's subconscious cues, stuff we don't realize we're noticing, that tells us we should feel in some way. Peeling paint, like old-fashioned furniture. Lace curtains, details that tell us to be nostalgic. Mostly things we pick up from movies, probably. I got lost at a carnival when I was 4. I never got so scared in my life. But I don't think anybody's feeling suddenly desperate for their mom when they pass that Ferris wheel. Maybe they are, Wallace said. I don't know. Sometimes I have little moments where it's like there's something I forgot, something I regret, or that I'm happy about, or something that makes me want to cry, but it's only there for a split second, and then it's gone. Maybe we're all shedding our fear and regret and hope everywhere we go, and we're catching traces of people we've never met. Maybe it's everywhere. How's that different from believing in ghosts? Lamar asked. It's totally different, Marla said. It's not supernatural, and it's not like the souls of dead people. It's just people leaving their mark on the world. So it's the ghosts of living people, Lamar said. No. You're talking about people having some kind of essence that can hang around a specific place after the person is gone, Lamar said. That's a ghost. No, it's not. I'm not saying it right, Marla said. She closed her eyes for a minute, thinking. Okay, she said at last. Do you all remember my grandmother? I do, said Jason. She was my grandmother, too. She was my dad's mom, not yours, Marla said. Anyway, you were only a year old when she died. I do remember her. Okay, Marla said. So she collected dolls from the time she was a kid. She and my grandfather used to travel a lot after he retired. And she'd bring them back from all over the world. She had them from France, Egypt, Italy, Brazil, China, everywhere. She kept them in her own special room, and it was full of them. Shelves of dolls, some tiny and some almost big some almost as big as I was. I loved it. One of my earliest memories is playing in that room with the dolls. I remember my dad would always warn me to be careful. And my grandmother would laugh and say, toys should not be played with. I had a favorite. A 21-inch red-haired doll in the short, tiny white dress like Shirley Temple. I called her Maggie. She was from the 1940s, and I loved her. I told her everything, and when I was lonely, I would imagine myself in that room, playing with Maggie. My grandmother died when I was 6, and when my dad and I went to see my grandfather after the funeral, he told me I should pick a doll to keep from the collection. I went to the room to get Maggie, and as soon as I walked through the door, something was wrong. It was as though the light had changed, become darker, harsher than it used to be. I looked around, and the lively, playful poses of the dolls now seemed unnatural, disjointed. It was as though all of them were staring at me. I didn't know what they wanted. Maggie was in the corner, and I took a step toward her, then stopped. I met her eyes, and instead of the painted glass that is I saw a stranger, I turned and ran. I raced down the hall as though something might be chasing me, not daring to look back until I reached my father's side. He asked if I picked up the doll, and I just shook my head. I never went back in that room. Everyone was silent. Charlie was transfixed, still seeing little Marla running for her life. "What happened to the dolls?" Carlton asked, only half breaking the spell. "I don't know. I think my mom sold them to another collector when my grandfather died," Marla said. "Sorry, Marla," Lamar said. "It's still just tricks of the mind. You missed your grandmother, you were frightened of death, and the dolls were inherently freaky." Charlie broke in, wanting to head off the argument. "Is everybody done eating? We have to go soon." "We still have plenty of time," Carlton said, looking down at his watch. "It's like 5 minutes away." Something else fell out of his mouth, landing next to the first dropped bit of food. John looked around the table from person to person, as though he were waiting for something. "We have to tell them," he said, looking at Charlie. "Oh yeah, we totally do," Jessica said. "Tell us what?" Jason piped up, peeking over the back of Marla's seat. "Shh," Marla said half-heartedly. She was looking at John. "Tell us what?" John dropped his voice, forcing everyone to lean in closer. Charlie did it, too, eager to hear, even though she knew exactly what he was going to say. "We went to Freddy's last night," he said. "Freddy's is still here?" Marla exclaimed too loud. "Shh," Jessica said, making frantic hand movements. "Sorry," Marla whispered. "I just can't believe it's still there." "It's not," Carlton said, raising his eyebrows and grinning illegitimately at Lamar. "It's hidden," John explained. "They were supposed to knock it down to build a mall, but they didn't. They just built around it. Entombed it," John corrected. "And you got in?" Lamar said. Charlie nodded confirmation. "No way." "What was it like?" Marla asked. "Exactly the same," John said. It was like everyone vanished." "I want to go too. You had to take us," Marla said. Jessica cleared her throat hesitantly, and they all looked at her. "I don't know," she said slowly. "I mean, today? Should we?" "We have to see it," Lamar said. "You can't tell us this and let us not see it. And not let us see it." "I want to see it," Jason chimed in. "What's Freddy's?" They ignored him. His eyes were wide, and he was hanging on to every word. "Maybe Jessica's right," John said with reluctance. "Maybe it's disrespectful to go tonight." There was a moment's pause, and Charlie knew they were waiting for her to talk. She was the one they were really afraid of offending. They needed her permission. "I think we should go. I don't think it's disrespectful. It's almost a way of honoring what happened." She looked around the table. Jessica was nodding. Charlie wasn't sure if it was much of an argument, but they didn't need to be convinced. They wanted an excuse. Marla twisted herself to look at Jason's plate. "Are you done eating?" she asked. "Yep," he said. Marla pointed to the game in his hand. "You know you can't play that during the ceremony." "Yep." "I'm serious, Jason. I'm locking you in the car." "Why don't you just lock me in the car?" he muttered. "I'd love to," Marla said under her breath as she turned back to the group. "Okay, we can go." They headed to the school in a caravan, the boys in Carlton's car, Marla following, and Charlie bringing up the rear. We should have carpooled, Jessica said idly, staring out the window. It hadn't occurred to Charlie. I guess, she said. On the other hand, I'm not sure I want to ride with Marla and Jason, Jessica said plainly. They are kind of intense, Charlie agreed. When they arrived, the parking lot was already jammed full. Charlie parked on the side street in what she hoped was a legal spot, and they walked to the school along with the familiar sidewalk. Jessica shivered. I've got goosebumps. It's weird to be here, Charlie said. The school looked unchanged from the outside, but the fence was new and slick. But the fence was new and slick, a mix of old and new, familiar and not. The things that had changed seemed out of place, and the things that had remained the same made Charlie feel out of place. It must be so strange for Carlton to live here, she thought. I know this is a nostalgia trip for you all, but I just live here, he had said. Somehow, Charlie was not sure she believed that. When they got to the playing field behind the school, the bleachers were already full. Rows of folding chairs had been laid out in front of them to add more seating, and Charlie spotted Marla and the boys at front. Oh, great, she said. I don't want to sit in the front row. I don't mind, Jessica said. Charlie looked at her. Of course you don't, she wanted to say. You're you. Yeah, she said instead. No big deal. Half the town must be here. She observed as they made their way to the group, where 2 seats had been saved. There was one open in the front row next to Carlton, and one right behind it, beside Marla. Jessica winked at Charlie and sat down next to Carlton. She had leaned toward him, and they started whispering, and Charlie repeated herself to Marla. Just speak carefully, speak clearly for this. Hold on, guys, I'm gonna spell out these seeds. Anyways, how was everybody's day today? That was weird. How's everybody's day today? I'm actually curious. That's good to know. Anyways, where was I? Oh, yes. Charlie repeated herself to Marla. There's a lot of people here. Yeah, Marla said. I mean, it's a small town, you know. Michael's... It was a big deal. Plus, his parents still live here. People remember. People remember, Charlie echoed softly. There was a small raised stage set up in front of them, with a podium and 4 chairs. Behind the chairs, a screen was suspended. Projected on it was a larger-than-life picture of Michael. It was a close-up. It was a close-up, just his face, and it was not the most flattering picture. His head was thrown back at an odd angle, his mouth open in laughter, but it was perfect, a joyful moment, snatched up and kept, not curated. He looked happy. Darn it, Marla said softly. Charlie looked at her. She was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Charlie put an arm around her. I know, she said. The sound system came on, and suddenly, with a whine that slowly faded. The system came on suddenly with a whine that slowly faded. 4 people walked on stage. A heavy-set man in a suit who went straight up to the microphone, an elderly woman, and a couple, a man and a woman. The man in the suit stepped to the podium, and the elderly woman sat down in one of the 4 chairs. The couple stayed back, but they did not sit. Charlie knew they must be Michael's parents, but she did not recognize them. When she was young, they had been just parents, a species that was most for the part unremarkable. She realized suddenly that she didn't even know their names. Michael's parents had not gone out of the way to interact with their son's friends. Charlie had literally spoken to them as Michael's mom and Michael's dad. If those were appropriate forms of address, the man at the podium introduced himself as the school's principal. He said a few things about loss and community and the fleeting preciousness of youth. He talked briefly about Michael's kindness, his artistic talent, and the impression he made, even as a small child, on everyone he met. It was true, Charlie reflected. Michael had been an unusually charismatic child. He wasn't exactly a leader, but they all found themselves wanting to please him, wanting to make him smile, and so they often did the things they knew he wanted to do, just to make him happy. The principal finished and introduced Michael's parents, Joanne and Donald Brooks. They stood at the podium awkwardly, each looking from face to face in the crowd, as if they were not sure how they had gotten here. Finally, Joanne stepped forward. "It feels strange to be up here," was the first thing she said, and a murmur of something like agreement swept quietly through the crowd. "We are so grateful to you all for coming, especially those of you who came from out of town." She looked directly at the front row, talking to Charlie and the others. "Some of Michael's friends have come from all over, and I think that is a testament to who he was that 10 years later, with your lives on new paths, moving on to a whole new stage in life." So close to the stage, Charlie could see she was about to cry, tears wavering in her eyes, but her voice was steady. "We are grateful that you are here. We wanted to give Michael a legacy with this scholarship, but it is clear that he's already left one, all on his own." Marla grabbed Charlie's hand, and Charlie squeezed back. "I want to say," Joanne continued, "something about the families who are not here. As we all know, Michael was not the only child lost during those terrible few months." She read out 4 more names, 2 girls and 2 boys. Charlie glanced at Marla. They all knew there had been other children, but Michael's death had loomed so great in all their lives, and that they had never even talked about the other victims. Now Charlie felt a pang of guilt. To someone, those little girls and boys had been as vital as Michael. To someone, their losses had meant the end of the world. She closed her eyes for a moment. "I can't mourn everyone," she thought. "No one can." John was still talking. "Although their families have moved on to other places, those young boys and girls will always have a place in our hearts. Now I would like to call to speak a young man who was particularly close to my son. Carlton, if you would." They all watched in surprise as Carlton stood and climbed up behind the podium. Joanne hugged him tightly and stayed close behind him as he pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. He cleared his throat, looking over the heads of the crowd, and then crumpled up the paper again and put it back in his pocket. "I don't remember as much about Michael as I should," he said finally. Too much of those years is a blur. I know we met when we were still in diapers, but I don't remember that, thankfully." There was a soft titter through the crowd. "I do know that as far back as I have memories, Michael is in them. I remember playing superheroes, drawing, which he was much better at than me. And as we got older, I remember, playing superheroes and drawing. What I really remember, though, is that my days were always more exciting when he was in them. He was smarter than me, He was always the one coming up with new ideas, new ways to get in trouble. Sorry about the lamps, by the way, Mrs. Brooks. If I had jumped the way Michael said, I probably would have only broken one. Donald laughed, a gulping, desperate sound. Charlie shifted uncontrollably and pulled her hand from Marla's with an apologetic half-smile. Their grief, naked, was too much to watch. It was raw, an open wound, and she could not stand to look. Carlton came back down to sit with them. Michael's grandmother spoke, and then his father, who had recovered enough to share the memory of taking his son to his first art class. He told the crowd about the scholarship for the graduating senior who has demonstrated both excellence and passion in the arts, and announced the winner of the first one, Anne Park, a slight Korean girl who came up quickly to the stage to accept her plaque and hugs from Michael's parents. It must have been strange for Anne, Charlie thought, her honor so overshadowed by its origins. But then she realized Anne must have known Michael too, however much in passing. After the ceremony, they went to say hello to Michael's parents, hugging them and making sounds of condolences. What do you say to someone who's lost a child? Can it be any easier? Can 10 years make a difference? Or do they wake up each morning as fresh with grief as the day he died? On a long cafeteria table by the stage, pictures and cards were collecting slowly. People had brought flowers, notes to Michael's parents, or to him. Things they remembered, things they wished they had said. Charlie went over and browsed through her notes. There were pictures of her and the others as well as of Michael. It shouldn't have surprised her. They were all together constantly, as a group or in rotating groups of 2 or 3. She saw herself in the middle of a pose. Michael, John, and she, all covered in mud, with Jessica beside them, still perfectly clean, refusing to go near them. Charlie smiled. That looks about right. And another 5-year-old Marla struggled to support the weight of her newborn little brother, with Lamar peering suspiciously at the tiny thing over her shoulder. Some of Michael's drawings were there, too, crayon scribblings professionally, incongruously framed. Charlie picked up one, a drawing of what she supposed was a T-Rex stopping through the city. It was actually, she realized now, almost amazing how talented he was. While she and the others were scribbling stick figures, Michael's drawings looked realistic, sort of. That's really good, John said over her shoulder. Charlie startled. You scared me, she said. Sorry. Charlie looked back at the drawing. Whatever it was better than she could draw now. Suddenly, her chest tightened, gripped with loss and rage. It wasn't just that Michael died young. It was what that truly meant. He had been stopped in his tracks, years, decades in life, snatched and torn violently from him. She felt herself well up in youthful indignation, as if she were a child again, wanting only to whine. It's not fair! Taking a deep breath, Charlie set the picture down and on the table and turned away. The gathering was continuing, but she needed to leave. She caught Marla's eye, and Marla, as carefully intuitive as always, nodded and caught Lamar's sleeve from their various vantage points. They all headed for the parking lot. No one seemed to notice their departure, which made sense. Except for Carlton, they were all strangers here. In the lot, they stopped by Marla's car. She had somehow called down a miracle and found a space right next to the school. Can I play my game now? Jason said immediately, and Marla found her keys in her purse and handed them over. Don't drive away, she warned. Suddenly, Marla grabbed her brother and pulled him close, hugging him to her for a long minute. Jeez, I'm only going to the car, he muttered. When she let him go. Yeah, maybe I should let you drive away, she said, giving him a little push. She cleared her throat. So, are we going to Freddy's? She said. They all looked to one another. Yeah, Charlie said. I think we should. Somehow, following this, going back to Frey's seemed like more than a game. It felt right. Let's meet there at sunset, she said. Hey, Jessica, can you catch a ride with the guys or something? I'm gonna go for a walk. You can come with us, Marla said. I promised Jason I'd take him to the movies. Charlie headed down the road without waiting to hear the rest of the discussion. A dozen feet from the lot, she realized she was being followed. She turned around. John? Do you mind if I come? You're going to your old house, right? How did you know that? It's the only interesting thing out this way. Anyway, I went to see my old place too. It was painted blue and there was a garden in the yard. It was weird. I know it wasn't blue when I lived there, but I couldn't remember what the color was supposed to be. Everything's so different. Charlie didn't say anything. She wasn't even sure she wasn't even sure she wanted John to come with her. Her house, her father's house, it was private. She thought of the first time John had seen the toys, his fascination, an interest that was all his, that had nothing to do with pleasing her. She relented. Okay, you can come. Is it? He hesitated. Is it different? It's really not, Charlie said. It wasn't quite true, but she wasn't sure how to explain the thing that had changed. They walked together for the better part of 3 miles away from town and down old tracks, first paved, then gravel. As they neared the place they left the roads, ascending the steep incline of a hill overrun with brush and trees, that should have been trimmed or cut down ages ago. 3 rooftops peeked over the leaves, scattered widely over the hill, but no one had lived in these houses in a long time. At last they walked up the driveway. John stopped short, staring at the house. I thought it would be less intimidating, he said softly. Impatient, Charlie took his arm for a second and pulled him away, leading them around the side of the house. It was one thing for him to be there with her, but she was not quite ready to let someone else inside. She wasn't even sure she wanted to go inside again anyway. He followed her without protest, as if aware that they were in her territory, and she would decide where they went. Alright, good night. Alright, where was I? The property was large, more than a lawn. There were woods surrounding the wide space of the backyard, and as a child, Charlie had often felt like it was her own little realm, ruler of all she surveyed. The grass had grown wild, weeds growing feral and up to their knees. They walked the perimeter. John peered into the woods, and Charlie was struck by her old childhood fear, like something out of a fairy tale. Don't go into the woods alone, Charlotte, her father warned. It was not sinister, just a parent's warning. Don't get lost, like telling her not to cross the street without holding someone's hand, or not to touch the stove when it was hot. But Charlie took it more seriously. She knew from her storybooks, as all children did, that the woods contained wolves and more dangerous things. She caught John's sleeve. Don't, she said, and he pulled back from the woods, not asking why. Instead, he went to a tree in the middle of the yard and put a hand on it. Remember that tree? He asked, smiling, something a little wicked in his voice. Of course, Charlie said, walking over. It's been here longer than I ever was. I think I know where this is going. But as he was looking at her, waiting for more, she suddenly remembered. It had been a sunny day, springtime. They were 6 years old, maybe. John was visiting, and they were playing hide-and-seek, half-supervised by Charlie's father, who was in the garage workshop, absorbed in his machines. The door was open so he could notice if someone screamed. But short of that, the outdoors was their own. John counted to 10, eyes covered, facing the tree that was home base. The yard was so wide and open that there were not many places to hide. So Charlie, buoyed up by the excitement of the game, dared to hide beyond the forbidden edge of the woods, just barely past the tree line. John searched the other places first. Behind her father's car. Okay, I need to take a breath because all this reading is getting me. I'm just gonna slow down a bit, and maybe if we're lucky, we'll get past 2 chapters tonight. Right? Let's see. I'm just gonna check everything and see how everything's going. Yep. Everything's going smoothly. Alright. That's good. Alright. Sorry, I bit my... I need to get this out again. Alright. Sorry, I just had to crack my neck. You know how uncomfortable it is. Alright. Where was I? Oh, yes. In the corner where one part of the garage jutted out, the space between the porch where the child could just barely crawl, he realized where she must be. And Charlie braced herself to run as she began to walk the edges of the yard, darting into the woods and out again, looking behind the trees. When at last he found her, she took off, tearing across the lawn to the home-base tree. When he was just behind her, so close he could almost touch her. As she sped on, staying just out of reach, she hit the tree, almost slamming into it, and John was right behind her, bumping into her a second later, too fast to stop. They were both giggling hysterically, and then they stopped at the same moment, still gasping to catch their breaths. Okay. Hey, Charlotte, John said, stressing her name in the mocking tone he'd always used. Don't call me that, Charlie said automatically. Alright. You ever seen Grown-Ups Kiss? He said. He picked up a stick and started digging at the tree bark, like he was more interested in that than in her answer. Yeah, I guess so. Oh, she shrugged. Wanna try it? He still wasn't looking at her. His face was streaked with dirt, like it often was, and his hair was sticking out in all directions. A twig caught in above his forehead. Gross, Charlie said, wrinkling her nose. Then, after a moment, yeah, okay. John dropped the stick and leaned toward her, his hands behind his back. Charlie closed her eyes, waiting, still not entirely sure what she was supposed to do. Charlotte! It was her father. Charlie jumped back. John's face was too close to hers that she banged into him with her forehead. Ow! He yelled, clapping a hand to his nose. Charlie's father came around the side of the tree. What are you up to, John? He pried John's fingers from his nose. You're not bleeding. You'll be fine. Charlotte, closer to the house, please. He then pointed to his finger, directing them forward. John, it looks like your mom's here anyway. He walked ahead of them toward the driveway where her car had just pulled in. Yeah, okay. John trotted off toward the driveway, turning once to wave at Charlie. He was grinning like something wonderful had happened, although Charlie was not quite sure what it was. Oh my, Charlie said now, covering her face, sure it was bright red. When she looked up again, John was grinning that same satisfied 6-year-old grin. "You know, my nose still hurts when it rains," he said, touching a finger to it. "It does not," Charlie said. She leaned back against the tree. "I can't believe you tried to kiss me. We were 6!" Then Chen stared at him accusingly. "Even the littlest heart wants what it wants," John said in a mock romantic voice. But there was an edge of something real in it. Something not well enough hidden. Charlie realized suddenly that he was standing very close to her. "Let's go see your dad's workshop," John said abruptly, too loud, and Charlie nodded. "Okay." She regretted it as she said it. She did not want to open the workshop door. She closed her eyes, still leaning against the tree. She could still see it. It was all that she could see when she thought of that place. The twitching, malformed metal skeleton in its dark corner, with its wrenching shutters and its blistering silver eyes. The image welled up in her head until it was all there. Until it was all there was. The memory radiated from cutting anguish, but she did not know who it belonged to. To the thing? To her father? Or to herself? Charlie felt a hand on her shoulder and opened her eyes. It was John, frowning at her like he was worried. "Charlie, are you okay?" "No." "Yes," she said. "Come on, let's go see what's in the workshop." It was not locked. There was no real reason it should be, Charlie thought. Her eyes went first to the dark corner. The figure was not there. There was a weathered apron hanging in its place, the one her father had worn for soldering, and his goggles next to it. But there was no sign of that uncanny presence. Charlie should have felt relief, but she didn't. Only a vague unease. She looked around. There seemed to be almost nothing left in the workshop. The benches were there, and her father had assembled and tweaked his inventions. But the materials, the blueprints, and the half-finished robots that were once crammed onto every surface had disappeared. Where are they? Had her aunt carted them away to the junkyard to rust and crumble among other discarded useless things? Or had her father done it himself? So no one else would have known, would have had to. The concrete floor was littered here, and there were scrapes. I'm trying to speak clearly. Oh well. At least I've tried. Let's see. Whoever had done the cleanup had not been thorough. Charlie knelt and picked up an oddly shaped scrap of wood, then a small circuit board. She turned it over. Whose brain were you? She wondered. But it did not matter. Not really. It was battered and worn, the etched copper too badly scratched to repair, even if someone wanted to. Charlie, John had said from across the workshop. He was in the dark corner. If the skeleton had been there, it could have reached out to touch him. But it's not there. What? Come see what I found. Charlie went. John was standing beside her father's toolbox, and he stepped away as she came over, giving her space. Charlie knelt down before it. It looked as if it had been polished. It was made of dark, stained wood, glossy with some kind of lacquer. Liqueur? Wait, was it liqueur? Is it liqueur? Or, okay, I am butchering these words. Oh well. She opened it gently. Charlie picked up an awl from the top tray and held it for a moment. The rounded wooden handle fitting into the palm of her hand, as if it had been made for her to use. Not that she knew how. The last time she had picked it up, she could barely fit her fingers around its base. She picked up the tools one after another, lifting them from their places. The toolbox had wooden spaces carved out into the precise shape of each item. All the tools were polished and cleaned, their wooden handles smoothed and their metal unrusted. They looked as though they had been used just that morning, wiped down and put away meticulously, like someone still cared for them. She looked at them with a fierce, unexpected joy, as if something had fought for was returned to her. But her joy felt wrong, misplaced. Looking at her father's things set her off balance. Something in the world was not as it should be. Seized suddenly with an unfounded fear, she thrust the thrall back into its place in the box, dropping it like something burning. She closed the lid, but she did not stand. Memory overtook her, and she closed her eyes, not feeling against it. Oh, crap. Yeah. I don't know what happened there. The thing I was trying to do was actually keep on some music while I'm reading the stories, so, yeah. Ow. Okay. Her feet were wedged in the dirt, and two large and callous hands covered her eyes. Suddenly there was a bright light, and Charlie squinted, squirming impatiently to see what was before her. 3 complete and gleaming figures towered over her, motionless, the sun reflecting off every edge and contour. They were blinding to behold. "What do you think?" She heard the question, but could not answer. Her eyes hadn't adjusted. The 3 masses of the standing metal all looked similar in structure. But Charlie had grown accustomed to seeing more than there was, imagining the final result. For a long time now, there had been 3 empty suits, hanging like carcasses from a rafter in the attic. Charlie knew they had a special purpose, and now she understood what it was. 2 long beams protruded from the top of the head of one of the hulking masses. The head itself was solid and skull-like. The beams looked as if they had been finely thrust there. "That's the rabbit," Charlie squealed, proud of herself. "You aren't scared of him?" the voice asked. "Of course not. He looks like Theodore." Theodore. That's right. The figure in the middle was more clearly rendered. Its face was chiseled, the features distinct. It was clearly a bear, and a single metal beam stuck out of the top of its head as well. Charlie was puzzled for a moment, then smiled. "For the top hat," she said with confidence, "the last form was perhaps the most frightening. A long metal clamp protruded from its empty face, in the place where a mouth might go, and it was holding onto something on a platter. The metal structure that looked like a jaw, wires running like strewn spaghetti up and down the frame and in and out of the sockets. That one's scary," she admitted hesitantly. "Well, this part will look like a cupcake." Her father pressed down on the top, and the jaw snapped shut, making Charlie jump then giggle. Suddenly, her laughter stopped. She had been so distracted she'd forgotten. "I'm not supposed to stand here." "I don't stand here." Her hands were trembling. How could she have forgotten? The corner. She looked at the ground, unable to lift her eyes, unable to move. One of her shoes was untied. There was a screw next to her floor and an old piece of tape, opaque with dirt. There was something behind her. "Charlie?" It was John. "Charlie!" She looked up at him. "Sorry. Just lost this place." She stood and took a step forward, positioning herself in the place she remembered. She glanced behind her as if the memory might manifest. The corner was empty. There was nothing. She knelt again and put her hand on the ground, fishing around until she found a small screw in the bare dirt. She palmed it, then looked over. There were small holes in the ground, exposed when she moved the loose dirt. Charlie ran her fingers over them, thoughtfully. "Charlie, I have to tell you something." There was something urgent in John's voice. Charlie looked around the workshop and stood up. "Can we go outside? I can't breathe in here." "Yeah, of course," he said. He followed her out into the yard and back into the hide-and-seek tree. She was tired, of wrung-out exhaustion deep inside. She would be fine in a minute, but she wanted a place that held only silly childhood memories. She sat down in the grass, leaning against the trunk, and waited for John to talk. He settled himself cross-legged in front of her, a little stiffly, smoothing his pants, and she laughed. "Are you worried about getting dirty?" "Times changed," he said with a wry smile. "What do you have to tell me?" she asked, and his face grew serious. "I should have said something a long time ago," he said. When something happens like that, you don't trust your memory. Don't trust your own mind." "What are you talking about?" Charlie asked. "Sorry." He took a deep breath. "I saw someone that night. The night Michael disappeared." "What do you mean?" "Remember when we were sitting at the table by the stage, and the animals started going crazy?" "I remember," Charlie said. "It had been bizarre, their movements upsetting. They were moving too fast, bending and spinning, cycling their limited program moves over and over. They seemed frantic, panicked. Charlie was mesmerized. She should have been afraid of them, but she wasn't. She saw, in their judging motion, a kind of desperation. She was reminded, for a moment, of dreams of running. Dreams when the world depended on her going just 10 steps forward. Yet her body could only move in slow motion. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. Chaotically violent. The animatronic animals on stage thrashed robotic limbs in all directions, their eyes in their sockets. "What did you see?" Charlie said to John now, shaking her head as though she could get rid of the image. "There was another mascot. A bear," he said. "Freddy," Charlie interrupted without thinking. "No, not Freddy." John took her hands as if trying to calm them both, but he let go before he could speak again. "It was standing right near us, next to our table, but it wasn't looking at the stage like everyone else. That technician came over, remember? Even he was just trying to watch the animatronics. I guess he was trying to figure out what was happening. I looked over at the mascot, and it looked back at me." He stopped. "John, what?" Charlie said impatiently. "Then the animatronics on stage stopped moving, and I looked over at them, and when we all turned back around, Michael was gone, and so was the mascot." Charlie stared at him in disbelief. "You saw the kidnapper," she said. "I didn't know what I saw. It was all chaos. I didn't even think about it. I didn't make the connection. It was just another animal at Freddy's. I didn't think about who might have been inside it. I was a kid, you know? You figure that the grown-ups already know everything you know." "Yeah," Charlie said. "I know. Do you remember anything? What the person looked like?" John was staring up at the sky, as if he were seeing something Charlie could not. "Yes," he said. His voice was deliberate, steady. The eyes, they were all I could see, but I still see them sometimes. They're like they're right in front of me. They were dead." "What?" "They were dead, just dull and flat. Like they had still moved and blinked and saw. But whatever was behind them had died a long time ago." He fell silent. It was growing dark. There was a bright, almost unnatural streak of pink from the western sky, and Charlie shivered. "We should go get to the car," she said. "It's almost time to meet everyone." "Yeah," John said, but he didn't move right away, still staring into the distance. "John, we have to go," Charlie said. He seemed to come back to himself slowly. "Yeah, we should go." He got up and brushed off his pants, then grinned at Charlie. "Race you?" he said, then took off running. Charlie chased after him, her feet pounding the asphalt, and her arms swinging free. Okay, that was a fast chapter. Well, actually, not entirely fast, but yeah. Okay, so Tell me, do you guys want me to read the next chapter tonight, or do you want me to save it for tomorrow night? I am actually all ears. I'm gonna pause the music real quick. Do you guys want me to read the next chapter? We still have plenty of time before midnight, so I guess that we actually do have enough time for one more chapter. So if you guys want to see that, let me know. Hold on. You know what? Yeah. Just for tonight. You know what that means, guys? Today, you get a double. Oh. Also, I kind of get the feeling that Charlie and John are kind of a thing in this book. So yeah. All right. Let's see. Yeah, chapter 4. Let's do it. Alright, here goes. Charlie and John were the last ones to the mall. When they pulled up, the others were gathered tight in a circle in front of Marla's car, as if sharing a conspiracy. Come on, Marla said before they had walked all the way to the group. She was bouncing on the balls of her feet as if she were ready to run for the door of the abandoned building. Everyone but Charlie and John had changed their clothing, wearing jeans and t-shirts, things more suited for exploration, and she had a brief moment of feeling out of place. At least I didn't wear a dress, Charlie thought. Let's go, she said. Marla's impatience seemed to be contagious. Or maybe it just gave Charlie an excuse to let her real feelings come to the surface. She wanted to show Phrase off to the others. Hold up, John said. He looked at Jessica. Did you explain everything? I told him about the night guard, she said. What else is there? He looked thoughtfully for a moment. I guess nothing, he said. I brought more lights, Carlton said, and held up 3 flashlights of varying sizes. He tossed one to Jason, a small one with an elastic headband attached. Jason turned it on and fixed it around his head and began moving enthusiastically in waves and circles, making the light bob and dance. Shh, Charlie said, even though he wasn't making any sound. Jason, Marla whispered, turn it off. We can't attract attention, remember? Jason gleefully ignored them, spinning off into the parking lot like a top. I told him if he's not good, he has to wait in the car, Marla told Charlie quietly. But now that we're here, I'm not sure which place is creepier. She eyed the bare branches overhead ragging in the wind, threatening to reach down and grab them. Or we can feed him to Foxy, Charlie winked. She went into her trunk and hefted out the police flashlight. She did not turn it on. Instead, Carlton switched on two of his smaller lights and handed one to Jessica. They all headed into the mall, knowing where they were going, and what was waiting for them there. Charlie, John, and Jessica and Carlton moved through the empty spaces with a sense of purpose, but the others kept stopping to look around. Let's see, Come on, Jessica said impatiently as Lamar gazed up at the atrium dome. You can see the moon, he said and pointed. Next to him, Marla nodded, mimicking his posture. It's beautiful, she said, although she could not see it. From a distance, they heard footsteps echo in the emptiness. Hey, over here, John hissed, and they hurried as quietly as they could. They could not run for fear of making noise, and so they walked, fast but careful, hugging the walls hugging the walls. They entered the black void of the department store, creeping along in the shadows until they reached the break in the wall. John held back the hanging piece of plastic obscuring the opening as the others maneuvered around the scaffolding. Jason was slow, and Charlie put his hand on his shoulder to hurry him up. As she steered him through the opening, a strong beam of light swept into the room, scanning up and down the walls. They all ducked down through the plastic, and ran down the alley where the others were crouched down against the wall. He saw us, Jason whispered, alarmed, starting straight to his sister. Shh, Marla said. They waited. Charlie was next to John this time, and after that moment by the tree, whatever it was, she was almost uncomfortably aware of him. They were not quite touching, but she seemed to know exactly where he was, an awkward third sense. She glanced at him, but his eyes were fixed on the opening to the hallway. They could hear the guard's footsteps now, clear in the empty space, each one distinct. He was moving slowly, deliberately. Jason closed his eyes, listening. She could tell he was from the other sound. He was from the sound, for goodness sake. She thought, getting closer, then farther, crisscrossing the open room like he was hunting for something. The steps came right up the entrance of the alley and stopped. They all held their breaths. He knows, Charlie thought, but the steps started again. As she opened her eyes and saw the light receding, he was going away. They all waited, still motionless, until they could no longer hear the tapping of his hard-soled shoes. She and John stumbled a little as they stood, and she realized they had been leaning against each other without realizing it. She didn't look at him. Instead, she set to work taking the heaviest things off the wooden shelf. Will I be needing this? Lamar asked, as Charlie handed him a bucket with a saw sticking out of it. We have to move the shelf, Jessica said. Come on. Jessica, Charlie, and Carlton got back into place and moved the shelf. Lamar tried to find a place to help, but there was not really room. Marla just waited. I'm better suited to supervising, she said when Charlie mocked glared at her. This time, the screaming at the metal door was not quite as loud, as if it no longer protested their entrance quite so strongly. Still, Marla and Jason covered their ears. You think that's not going to bring the guard? Marla hissed. Charlie shrugged. Didn't last time, she said. I know he saw us, Jason said again. The others ignored him. His flashlight went right over me, he insisted. It's really okay, Jessica said. We thought he saw us that last night too, but it was fine. Jason looked dubious, and Lamar bent over to his eye level. Hey, Jason, what do you think the guard would do if he saw us? Shoot us? Jason whimpered, eyeing Lamar warily. Worse, Lamar said gravely. Community service. Jason wasn't sure what it meant, but his eyes opened as wide as it was something terrible. Will you leave him alone? Marla whispered, amused. He didn't see us, Jason reassured himself, though clearly unconvinced. Charlie turned on the big light and shone it down the hallway. "Oh my!" Marla gasped as the first light streaked through the interior across the interior of the pizzeria. Suddenly, it became real, and her face was flushed with awe and fear. They went in one by one. The temperature seemed to drop as they walked into the hall, and Charlie shivered, but she did not feel ill at ease. She knew where they were now, and she knew what they would find. When they got to the dining room, Carlton spread his arms wide and twirled. "Welcome to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza," he said in a booming announcer's voice. Jessica giggled, but the melodrama didn't actually seem out of place. Marla and Lamar gaped at the room, awestruck. Charlie set the large flashlight down on the ground, the beam facing up, and it lit up the main room in a dim, almost ghostly illumination. "Cool," Jason said. His eyes fell on the merry-go-round, and he raced for it and jumped on the back of a pony before anyone could stop him. He was too big for it, his sneakers dangling all the way to the ground. Charlie smiled. "How do I make it go?" he shouted. "Sorry, buddy," John said. Jason climbed off, disappointed. The arcade is over this way," Carlton said, motioning to anyone who might follow. Marla went with him, while Jason filled hopefully with the carousel's control box. Lamar had walked to the stage where he was standing transfixed, staring up at the animals. Charlie went over to him. "Hold on, guys. I'm going to spell out these seeds and then continue." Alright. Okay, What? Something happened? Okay. Let's see. "I can't believe they're still here," he said as she walked up. "Yeah," she said. "I'd forgotten this was a real place," Lamar said. Lamar smiled, for the first time, resembling the little boy Charlie had once known. What the heck? Right, Charlie smiled back. There was something surreal about the place. She had certainly never told any of her school friends about it. She would not have known where to begin. Worse, she would not have known where to stop. Jessica poked her head out of the retracted curtain at the side of the main stage, and they both startled. "What are you doing?" Lamar asked. "Exploring," she said. "There's nothing back here but a bunch of wires, though." She disappeared into the folds of the cloth again. After a moment, they heard a thud and she jumped to the ground, and she came strolling over. "Do they work?" Lamar asked, pointing at the animals. "I don't know," Charlie said. Truthfully, she had no idea how they worked. They had always just been, sent to intermittent life by whatever alchemy her father performed in his workshop. But it doesn't look like anything was missing. They should work. They should work. She reluctantly added, though in her head, she questioned the idea of trying to turn them on. "Hey!" Jessica exclaimed. She was kneeling by the stairs to the stage. "Everybody come here now!" Charlie went over, and Lamar followed. "What is it?" Charlie asked. "Look!" Jessica said, shining her little light. Though well hidden along the grain of wood, there was a door inset into the wall of the stage. "How did we not see that?" Charlie wondered. "We weren't looking," John said, staring intently at the small door. The whole group had gathered, and now Jessica looked around them with a grin. He put her hand on the little doorknob and pulled. Magically, it opened. The door revealed a small, sunken room. Jessica shone the light around. It was full of equipment. One wall was covered in TV screens. Must be CCTV. Come on. Jessica handed her flashlight to Charlie and swung her legs through the door. There was one deep step leading down into the room, which was no bigger than a large refrigerator turned on its side. That's a little too cramped for me. I'll keep looking around here, John saluted, then turned as though to stand guard. This is like a clown car, Walla remarked as she jostled against Charlie. The space was too cramped for all of them, but they crowded together. Jason sat on the step, feeling more comfortable by the exit. There were 8 television screens across the wall, each with its own little panel of buttons and knobs, and sticking out beneath them was a panel, almost a table, covered in buttons. They were large and black and unlabeled, and spaced in an irregular series. The other wall was blank, except for a single large switch by the door. "What's this do?" Jason said, and put his hand on the switch. He hesitated just long enough for someone to stop him, and then pulled it. The lights came on. "What?" "What?" Carlton looked to the others frantically. They all stared at one another in confused silence. Jason climbed up and poked his head into the main room. "They're on out here too. Some of them, at least," he said too loudly. "Why is there power?" Jessica whispered, reaching over Jason to pull the door closed again. "How is that possible?" Charlie said. "This place hasn't been open in 10 years. "Cool." Marla leaned forward, studying the monitors as though expecting some sort of answer to be revealed. Turn on the TVs, Jason said suddenly. "I can't reach." Jessica flicked on the first TV, then static crackled across the screen. "Nothing," Charlie said impatiently. "Just a sec." She twisted the dial, wiggling back and forth until an image emerged. It was the stage, centered on Bonnie. The other animals weren't visible. Jessica turned on the rest of the TVs, adjusting them until the pictures became clear. Although most were still poorly lit, they still worked, and Charlie said almost under her breath. "Maybe," Charlie had said almost under her breath. "Maybe," Jessica said. "Hey, someone go out there. See if the camera's live." "Okay," Marla said after a brief hesitation, wriggling her way to the exit and awkwardly climbed over Jason. A moment later, she appeared on the camera, on stage beside Bonnie. Marla waved. She appeared multicolored as the stage lights bathed her in purple, green, and yellow from the different sides. "Can you see me?" she asked. "Yeah," Carlton shouted. Lamar was staring at the buttons. "What do these do?" he said with a wicked grin, pressing one. Marla screamed, "Ah!" Marla screamed. "Marla, are you okay? What happened?" Marla was still standing on the stage, but she had backed away from Bonnie and was staring at him as if he might bite. "You moved!" Marla yelled. "Bonnie moved! What did you do?" "Marla," Jessica yelled, laughing. "It's okay, we pushed a button." Marla pressed the button again, and they all watched the screen this time. Sure enough, Bonnie turned stiffly to one side. He pressed it again, and the rabbit swiveled back to face the absent audience again. "Try another one," Carlton said. "Go ahead," Lamar said, and climbed out of the little room to join Marla on stage. He crouched down to inspect Bonnie's feet. "They're set to the swiveling pattern," he called. "Yeah?" Jessica called back, not really listening. Carlton started pressing buttons as the rest of them watched the cameras. After a moment, Charlie left the room as well. "It's too stuffy in here," she explained. Jessica's perfume and Carlton's hair gel, both of which smelled nice enough out in the open, were starting to form a sickly miasma. She stepped out into the open to watch them experiment with the animals on stage. Most of the dining room was still dark. There were 3 colored spotlights suspended from the ceiling. aiming beams of purple, yellow, and green at the stage. The animals were cast now in unnatural colors, and dust and beams of light that shone like tiny stars, so many that it was difficult to see through them. The floor beneath the long tables was dusted with glitter that had fallen from the party hats, and she looked around and she noticed the drawings that lined the walls of the place, all at the height of the children's eyes. They had been there. Charlie wondered now where her father had gotten the first ones when the restaurant opened. Had he used her own childish scribblings, or had he made them himself and stuck them up? Forgeries to encourage actual children to display their art. The thought of her father hunched over his workbench, gripping onto an unsteady crayon with hands accustomed to manipulating microchips, made her want to giggle. She noticed the flashlight still on in the center of the room, and she went to switch it off. "Don't waste the battery," she said in her head, in chorus with Aunt Jan's voice. She turned her attention to the stage. It looked like the others had gone, Chica and Bonnie, to go to the series of small movements. Gone through a series of small movements. They could each swivel their entire bodies back and forth. Their hands, feet, and head could be moved in various directions, but each movement was separate. Charlie went back to the control room and stuck her head in. "Can you make them do the dance?" she asked. "I don't know how," Carlton said, leaning back away from the monitors. "All this must have been used to program the dances. I don't think someone was in here manually controlling everything during the shows," he said. He shook his head with certainty. "That would have been impossible." "Huh," Charlie said. "Everyone quiet," Mala called out, and they all fell silent. For a moment there was no sound. Then Lamar said, "What?" Mala frowned, tilting her head to the side, listening for something. "I thought I heard something," she said finally. "It was like pings of a music box?" Her mouth barely moved as she spoke. "It's gone." "Why isn't Freddy moving?" Charlie asked. "I don't know. I can't find the controls for him." Jessica said, tapping the monitors. "These cameras don't show the whole place." Charlie peered at them, but they were mixed up, in no logical order. She couldn't piece together a picture of the whole restaurant. There's 3 cameras on stage, 1 on each animal, but there should be 1 on the whole thing, Jessica was saying. "There's the entrance to the kitchen, but not the kitchen itself. And you can't see the hallway in the room with the little stage we were last night. Maybe the cameras are just in the main room?" Carlton suggested. "Nope," Jessica said. "There are cameras everywhere out there." "So?" Carlton said. "There's gotta be another control room," Jessica said triumphantly. "Maybe down the hall by the other stage." Charlie went back into the main room again. She was feeling restless, less excited by the discoveries than less excited about the discoveries than the others, though she wasn't sure why. She watched the stage. Carlton was still playing with the buttons, Bonnie and Chica jerking in small, disjointed motions, and Freddy Fazbear remained motionless, his eyes half closed and his mouth slightly open. "Hey," Lamar said suddenly. "Marla, the music! I hear it now!" Everyone was silent again. Then Marla shook her head. "Creepy," she said, more excited this time, rubbing her hands together as though they were sharing campfire stories. Lamar looked thoughtfully at Freddy. "Let's go find the other control room," Jessica said, emerging with a determined look on her face. "Okay." Marla jumped from the stage to join them, and they started scanning the rest of the stage, looking for a second door. "I'm staying in here," Jason called from the first room. "This is so cool!" Jessica swiveled back and forth rapidly on the stage as he pushed her button repeatedly. Lamar went to join Jason. "Okay, my turn," he said, leaning on the door. He went in, not waiting for Jason's response. Charlie stayed where she was, still staring at Freddy, frozen in the middle of his act. John came up next to her, and she felt a flash of irritation. She did not want to be cajoled into joining the search. He stood there for a moment, looking at Freddy, then leaned close to her and whispered, "I'm counting to 100. You better hide." Surprised by her out of her thoughts, she looked at him for a moment, her irritation broken. He winked at her and covered his eyes. It was absurd. It was childish. And in that moment, it was the only thing she wanted to do. Slightly giddy, Charlie took off, looking for a place to hide. Jason pushed the series of buttons again with increasing frustration. "I'm bored now," he announced. "How can you be bored?" Lamar said, wide-eyed. "They aren't working anymore." Jason continued to press the buttons, no longer watching the monitors. Lamar studied the monitor. Bunny's head was up and turned to the side. His eyes appeared to be watching the camera. "Well, go find your sister then," he told Jason. "I don't need her permission to be bored," impatiently. Jason climbed up and out of the control room. "Everyone is so sensitive," Lamar muttered, suddenly realizing he was alone in the control room. He climbed out, but Jason was already gone. Jessica was leading the exploration party, heading toward the little stage they had discovered the night before. Marla looked back and saw Jason skipping to catch up just before they disappeared into the long hall. "Hey, be careful!" she called over his shoulder as Jason branched off in his own direction. Lamar caught up to the group and followed them on their way into the hall. The main dining room was empty now, though Jason could hear Charlie's and John's playful shouts echoing from the party rooms that extended off the main building. Left alone, Jason headed straight for the arcade. It was more dimly lit than the rest of the place, and without power, the arcade machines appeared to be towering black monoliths in a forgotten graveyard. The air was stale and thin. Jason went to the nearest console and pressed a few buttons. Some stuck with age, but nothing happened. "Plug it in, duh." He ducked behind the games to check, but even though the mounds of wires seemed impossibly tangled, it looked like they were plugged in. Maybe there was a switch for the room? He started checking the walls. There was no obvious switch, but as Jason scanned the walls, he became distracted by the children's drawings taped in clusters. Jason was too young to have memories of his own from being at Freddy's. Even Hurricane itself was no more than a hazy set of impressions. But something about the pictures brought up a sense of nostalgia. They were all the same. Really, the kinds of drawings he and other kids had done, and every other kid had done. Figures with circles for bodies and sticks for arms, in a multitude of colors. Only a few details showed which figures were the animals. Chica with her beak, Bonnie with his ears, and it seemed there had been a bit more attention paid to the drawings of Freddy Fazbear. They were a little better. The children had been a little more careful to make the details right. Jason found himself looking at one of the drawings in particular. It was the same as the others, maybe a little better. Bonnie hugging a child. There was no name at the bottom. Jason took the picture off the wall, uncertain why this one in particular interested him so much. John burst into the room with a wide grin and deep breath, but then, seeing that it was only Jason inside, he quickly returned with a stoic demeanor. "What's up?" He nodded his head, playing it cool, then casually stepped away before returning to a sprint. Playing hide-and-seek like babies. Jason thought, I hope I never fall in love. He looked back down at the drawing and squinted as though not seeing correctly. The child was now facing away from Bonnie. Jason stared for a long minute. Wasn't he hugging Bonnie before? He looked out of the main room, but Marla was out of sight. Looking for the control room, Jason folded the drawing carefully and put it in his pocket. It was suddenly apparent how quiet it had become outside. Jason stepped out timidly and peeked into the dining room. "Guys," he whispered, looking back once, then ventured out to find the group. Jessica, Lamar, Colton, and Marla were still creeping slowly around the other half of the building. The spotlights from the dining room didn't reach this far, only accenting edges and corners or specks of glitter. This is getting good. I get the feeling that the animatronics are gonna come alive again. Well, obviously they are. How many chapters are in this book anyway? I'm just gonna check. I'm just gonna check to see how many chapters are in this book real quick, because I have 13 chapters. Jeez. Let's see. What was I? Jessica scanned the wall with her flashlight, looking for breaks in the plaster, and motioned to Marla to do the same. "We have to check for a hidden door," she said. "The last one wasn't really hidden," Carlton pointed out. "Yeah," Jessica conceded, but she kept her light on the wall, clearly not ready to give up the hunt. They passed 2 bathrooms they had not noticed the night before. "Do you think the plumbing still works?" Carlton said. "I really need to pee." "What are you, 5 years old? I don't want to hear." You little turd. You little... Get your butt down from there, you little... You dare interrupt my story time, boy? Sorry about that, guys. Ted Cooper decided to be a little turd today. Or tonight. Let's see, where was I? Jessica rolled her eyes and walked faster. When they got to the room with a little stage, everyone stopped. Marla and Lamar went closer to the stage, drawing together slightly as if unaware they were doing it. Even though Carlton and Jessica had been there the night before, it was as though they were seeing it anew through Marla and Lamar's eyes. They still had not seen what was behind the curtain. Carlton realized suddenly, "I remember these posters." Lamar said, "I remember this too," Marla said, pointing to a sign that read "Out of Order" strung across the stage. "My whole life I felt uneasy when I've seen that phrase. Even if it's just at a vending machine," she laughed insincerely. "I know what you mean," Lamar said softly. But before he could go on, Carlton interrupted. "Found it." "Maybe," Jessica amended. "There was a door, close set into the wall, like the one below the stage. Not quite hidden, but not meant to be noticed. It was painted black, like the walls of the room. Jessica turned the knob and pulled, but it was stuck tight." "Locked?" "I don't think so." "Let me try," Marla said. She grabbed the knob and yanked it, and it came open, sending her stumbling back. "Impressive," Lamar said. "Yeah, well, taking care of Jason makes me tough," Marla grinned as she knelt down to squeeze through the small door. It was almost the same as the first room, a set of 8 TV screens and a large panel of unmarked black buttons. Carlton fumbled to find the master switch, reaching his hand into the dark corner, and then, with a click, the power came on, and a soft buzzing sound filled the room. Rich, bizarre reds and blues began to stream in under the door of the stage from the stage lights outside. Jessica and Carlton began switching televisions on. They filled with the knobs until they were showing pictures, though most were very dark. From here, they could see a long shot of the main stage, just as in the other room. But the cameras were showing other places and angles. While the first control room only had shots of the main dining room, here they could see into other areas of the restaurant. The private party rooms, which were set up with glittery decorations for events that would never happen. Hallways and an office that looked... Hold on, guys. I need to check... Whew. Whew. Okay, we've only got 10 pages to go. Let's see, The room behind them was visible as well. The camera trained on the out of order sign, now lit with otherworldly shades, and the curtain behind it. On one side of the screen, they could see Jason ducking back into the arcade. "Maybe I should go get him," Wallace said, but no one responded. Carlton started pressing buttons. Spotlights appeared and vanished on the stage in the main dining room as he did, illuminating the first animal and then another, lighting up empty spaces where someone might have stood. He flipped a switch, and it seemed for a moment that nothing happened. Then Lamar started laughing, pointing at one of the screens. The pizza decorations lining in the walls were spinning wildly, as though they might leap off and go rolling away. "I forgot they used to do that," Lamar said as Carlton brought them slowly to a halt. There was a large black dial to one of the buttons, and Carlton spun it, but it seemed to do nothing. "Let me try," Lamar said. He elbowed Carlton to the side and pressed another button. There was a high-pitched whine. They all jumped, and it quickly faded down to a static hum. Lamar pressed the button again, and the sound was gone. "I guess we know what turns the speakers on," Carlton said. "I bet we can figure out how to play the music," Jessica said. She reached forward and pressed something else, and stage lights popped up while the main lights dimmed. The figures on the main stage suddenly stood out a little, commanding attention. She pushed it again, and the lights faded back to normal. "I love that," Carlton said. "What?" "Stage lights," he said. One switch, and it's like a whole nother world up here." Another button flickered the stage lights on and off in the room behind them, while another started and stopped like the little merry-go-round. Its tinkling music grinding in too slowly, like the ride itself was trying to remember how the song went. They managed to get the speakers on again without the feedback whine, but there was still only static. "I have an idea," Jessica said, pushing to the front of the group. She switched on the static again, then started turning the knob back and forth. The hum grew louder in pitch, then higher, responding to her adjustments. "Progress," Carlton said. "It's still just static," Rawley said, unimpressed. Jessica turned it lower again, then snatched her hand from the dial like she had bitten and punched the button, shutting the speakers off. "What?" Rawley asked. Jessica remained motionless, her hands still suspended in the air. "What happened? Did it shock you?" Carlton asked. "It sounded like a voice," Jessica answered. "What did it say?" Marla asked, apparently interested again. "I don't know. Let me try again." She turned the speaker on again, calling forth the static, and lowered the hum as they all listened, intent on the sound as it sank to a lower register, just below the range of human voice. They all heard it, grinding in broken words. almost too slow and distorted to be considered speech. They all looked at one another. "What on earth?" Wallace said. "Hi, Caesar. How you doing?" "No, it's just random static," Lamar said. He reached for the controls and dialed the pitch back up slowly. For another fleeting moment, there was a purposeful sound. "That sounded like singing," Colton said. "No," Lamar said, sounding more unsure this time. "Do it again," Wallace said. Lamar did, but this time the static was empty. "Is that Charlie?" Wallace suddenly became focused on a blurry figure moving down the dark hall toward them, sliding along the hall as though to remain unnoticed. Charlie was hurrying, almost skipping, as trying to find another place to hide. She glanced behind her, vaguely suspecting that John might be cheating. She moved through the darkness and toward the colorful glow of the small stage curtain, which was throwing eerie red and blues onto the tables and party hats. Okay, No, I didn't get scared. No. I just cracking my neck. Going down this passage always felt like a long, perilous journey, one not to be made alone. She kept her gaze fixed behind her, letting the wall beside her guide her step. She knew John was close, probably creeping up on her in the dark. Suddenly, she backed into something, stopping short. She had been moving faster than she thought. Or, more likely, the hall was not as long as she remembered. She saw a shadow at the end of the hall. If he turned his head, he would see her, without thinking. Without thinking, Charlie climbed onto the platform, and she had bumped into and ducked behind the curtain, tucking herself between the wall and the large, bulky prop, trying not to breathe. "Charlie," he called, still far away. "Charlie!" Charlie felt her heartbeat quicken. There had been boys she liked now and then, but this was something different. She wanted him to find her, but not quite yet. As she waited, her eyes adjusted to the darkness, and she was able to make out the shape of the curtain and the edge of the stage. She looked up at the object in front of her. No! Her body shuddered, then froze. It was standing over her. It was the thing from her father's workshop, the misshapen thing that hung in the corner, shaken by random convulsions as its eyes burned silver. Does it hurt? Now it was still, and its eyes were blank and dull. It was staring straight ahead, insensate. And its arm with a hug hung useless again at its side. She recognized his eyes, but he was somehow worse now, encased in hollow body parts and matted with red fur, and a stench of oil and glue. He had a name now. They called him Foxy, but she knew him better. Charlie shrank away, pressing against the wall, her heart racing and her breath shallow, too fast. Her arm had been touching its leg, and now she felt a sudden itchiness from it, like she had been contaminated. She wiped her hand violently against her shirt and she began to panic. Run! She sprang away from it, pushing off the wall to get away, to move before it saw her. But the edge of the stage caught her foot, stumbling forward, momentarily entangled in the curtain. She struggled to get free when suddenly the thing's arm jerked up, and the hook slashed at her arm. She ducked away too late, and it cut her. The pain was shocking, like freezing water. She tripped backward and felt herself falling for long seconds. And then she was caught. "Charlie, are you okay?" It was John. He had caught her. She tried to nod, but she was shaking. She looked at her arm. There was a cut above the elbow, almost 4 inches long. It was bleeding freely, and she covered it with her hand, the gaps between her fingers welling over her over as her own blood leaked through. "What happened?" Marla asked, rushing up behind her. "Charlie, I'm so sorry. I must have hit a button that caused it to move. Are you okay?" Charlie nodded. "A little less shaky. I'm fine," she said. "It's not that bad." She moved her arm her arm around experimentally. "See? No severe nerve damage," she said. "I'll be fine." Carlton and Jessica and Lamar came hurrying out of the control room. "We should take her to the ER," Carlton said. "It's fine," Charlie insisted. She stood up, refusing John's help, and braced herself on the stage for a moment. She heard her Aunt Jen's voice in her head. "How much blood have you lost? You don't need to go to a hospital." She could move her arm just fine, and she would not have bled to death from this. She felt dizzy, though. "Charlie, you look like a ghost," John said. "We need to get you out of here." "Okay," she thought. Her thoughts were scattered, and the injury hurt less than it should have. She took deep breaths as they headed for the exit, grounding herself. John handed her a piece of cloth, and she put it to the cuts to slow the bleeding. "Thanks," she said, looking at him. Something was missing. "Was that your tie?" she asked, and he shrugged. "Do I look like a tie person?" She grinned. "I thought it looked good on you." "Jason!" Marla yelled as they passed the arcade. "Move it or I'm leaving you behind." Jason ran to catch up. Is Charlie okay?" she said anxiously. Marla caught her breath and put her arm around him. "She's fine," she reassured him. They walked briskly down the same corridor they had entered through. Jason looked back as he was being guided out, studying the pictures on the walls once more before losing sight of them. The colored lights from the stage were fading, and the flashlight was throwing shapes and shadows on everything, making the drawings more difficult to see. But Jason could swear he saw the figures moving in the pictures. They all hurried back through the empty building and out to the parking lot, not keeping watch for the guard. When they all made it to the car, Lamar, who had grabbed the big flashlight, flipped it on and shone it at Charlie's arm. She looked down at the cut. "Do you need stitches?" Marla asked. "I'm so sorry, Charlie." We were all being careless. "It's not your fault," Charlie said. She knew she sounded annoyed, but she didn't mean to. Her voice was tight and clipped with pain. The shock was worn off, but that meant the wound began to hurt. "It's fine," Charlie said. And after a long moment, the others gave in somewhat reluctantly. "We should at least get you some stuff to clean that up and bandage it," Charlie said, wanting to do something to atone, however small. "There's a 24-hour drugstore just off the main road," Carlton offered. "Charlie, why don't you go with Marla, and I'll drive your car back to the motel." "I'm fine," Charlie protested half-heartedly, but she handed Jessica the keys. "You're a good driver, right?" Jessica rolled her eyes. "People from New York know how to drive, Charlie." John lingered a moment as Charlie was getting into the Marla's car. She smiled at him. "I'm fine. I'll see you tomorrow." Oh, he looked at her like there was something more he wanted to say, but he just nodded and left. "Okay," Marla said, "to the drugstore." Charlie twisted in her seat and to look at Jason. Did you have fun?" she asked. "The games don't work," he said, obviously preoccupied. The drugstore was only a few minutes away. "You stay in the car," Marla commanded Jason to pull to a stop. "Don't leave me out here," Jason pleaded. "I told you to stay." And she repeated, a little confused by fear in his voice. He didn't answer, and she and Charlie headed inside. Keep buying one. Hello. Alright, where was I? As soon as they were gone, John pulled the drawing out of his pocket and held it up under the faint lights of the parking lot to examine it. It did not change back. Bonnie was reaching toward a child who was facing away from him. Curious, John scraped at the crayon lines with his fingernail, the wax coming off easily, leaving its trace on the paper. As soon as Marla passed over the fluorescent-lit, air-controlled drugstore, she sighed and put her hands to her temples. "Oh, he's such a little brat," she said. "I like him," Charlie said honestly. She was still using John's tie to stanch the bleeding, and now, in brighter light, she peeled it back to see the cut. The bleeding had almost stopped. It was not as bad as it first appeared, though the tie was irreparably ruined. "Hey," she said, "how come you brought Jason anyway?" Mala didn't answer right away, setting her sights on the first aid aisle and heading for it. "Here we are," she said. "What do you think, Gauze?" Sure. What do you think, Gauze?" "Sure, but don't call me Gauze." Charlie leaned into Marla, but was ignored. Antiseptic, Marla continued, grabbing the items. "The thing is," she said, "so Jason's dad and our mom have been married since before he was born. I mean, obviously, and they're probably getting divorced. I know about it, but Jason doesn't." "Oh no," Charlie said. "They're fighting all the time," Marla went on, "and it scares him, you know? I mean, my dad left when I was still a little kid, so I grew up with that. I was used to it. Plus, I gotta have a great stepdad. But for him, it's gonna feel like the end of the world. And they're sure they're not doing anything to make it and they're sure not doing anything to make it easier. They're fighting right in front of us. So I didn't want to leave him alone with that for a week." "I'm so sorry, Marla," Charlie said. "Yeah, it's okay. I'm leaving in a year anyway. I'm just worried about the brat out there." "He's not really a brat," Charlie said, and Marla grinned. "I know, he's pretty great, right? I kind of like having him around." They paid for their supplies. The clerk, a teenage boy, didn't bat an eye at Charlie's moderate blood-spattered appearance. Outside, they sounded the hood of the car. Marla started to open the bottle of antiseptic, but Charlie held a hand for it. "I can do it myself," she said. Marla looked like she was about to argue, but she swallowed whatever she was going to say and handed Charlie the bottle of and a piece of gauze. As Charlie awkwardly cleaned her arm, Marla smiled officially. Speaking of people we like having around, are you having fun with John?" "Ow, that stings." "And I don't know what you mean," Charlie said primly, suddenly putting all her attention on her task. "You do too. He's following you around like a little puppy, and you are loving it." Charlie bit back a smile. "How about you and Lamar?" she retorted. And no, I'm not saying the other R word. That is not okay." "Me and who now?" Marla said. "Here." She held out a hand for the bloody gauze, and Charlie handed it to her, reaching for a clean strip. You're gonna have to let me tape it," Marla said. Charlie nodded and held the gauze in place as Marla reached for the tape. "Come on," Charlie went on. "I see the way you look at him." "Nope." Marla smoothed down the last piece of tape and put everything in the bag. "Seriously," Charlie said as they got back into the car. "You're adorable together, and your names are anagrams for each other. Marla and Lamar. It's meant to be." Both laughing and headed back to the motel. Well, isn't that sweet? Alright. Next, tomorrow night, we are going to be tackling Chapter 5. So, If you guys are ready for that, leave a like and comments, and subscribe to more if you want, and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more. Thank you so much for coming to tonight's Stories with Khan, episode 3. This is going pretty good so far, and I hope to keep doing it in the future. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this, smash the like button, subscribe to the channel if you're new. And as always, I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.